When the banana first spoke, people told the same jokes in the same exhausted voices about slipping into dictatorship, about a republic run by fruit, about how at least our new ruler would come with potassium. Carol heard them later on broadcast clips replayed as memes after the world decided this had been inevitable. At the time it began, she was standing under supermarket fluorescents, trying to make a supply chain story sound like something a human would read on purpose. She had come for a photograph, a tidy pyramid of imported bananas with a little sign that said, "Weakened Value." The produce manager had given her the rehearsed speech about cold chain integrity and reducing shrink, and Carol had nodded like it mattered, because it did. Just not in the way people thought. She was about to crouch for the angle that made the display look abundant when she saw one banana lying wrong side up, its peel turned toward her like a face. Across the yellow curve, letters had appeared as if the banana had grown them. Bring me home. Not marker. Not a sticker. The fibers of the peel were raised and darkened in a perfect whimsical script that bent with the fruit's own arc, as though the message had been printed by a machine that understood charm. Carol did what journalists do when their brain refuses to accept the scene. She checked the obvious. She rubbed the words with her thumb. No smear. She scraped lightly with a fingernail. No residue. She held it close enough to smell the peel for solvent and got only the ordinary green sweet scent of unripe fruit. Then she photographed it from 3 angles because if reality was going to break rules, she wanted metadata. The produce manager made a joke about art students and asked if she wanted him to toss it. Carol heard herself say no too quickly. She put the banana into her basket on top of a bag of onions, and the decision felt absurdly intimate, like accepting a stranger's hand in a crowd. She did not yet believe the banana was intelligent. She believed in hoaxes, corporate stunts, and the deep human need to be fooled on weekends. But the message was physically embedded, and that meant either a new manufacturing trick or a kind of biology she didn't have words for. Outside the store, she sat in her car and called her editor, who told her to stop chasing viral fruit nonsense and get back to the logistics angle. Carol drove anyway, back toward her apartment, toward her laptop, toward the sensible world. The banana rode in the passenger seat because she didn't want it bruised, which was ridiculous because it was only a banana. At a red light, she glanced down and her stomach tightened. The peel had changed. Under the first line, a second arc of letters had formed, smaller and somehow smugger. No, really. Home. It read like a punchline delivered by someone who knew the audience would laugh and comply. The light turned green, and Carol went on driving, aware of how carefully she was not looking at the fruit. As a matter of record, later committees would say the first confirmed communication occurred in a grocery store in Northern California, and they would cite timestamps, surveillance footage, and Carol's photographs. But that wasn't what convinced her. What convinced her was what appeared next, as she pulled into her building's parking lot and her phone buzzed with a notification, an email from her editor asking where the draft was. Carol stared at the banana. On its peel, in that same curved script that imitated the shape of itself, a new message surfaced with the steady confidence of something that had been listening. Check your subject line, Carol. She opened the email. The subject line had been changed somehow, impossibly to 4 words she hadn't written. Bring it to Dayton. She went upstairs with the banana cradled like contraband. And by midnight, the story she was supposed to be writing about ports and pallets and refrigerated trucks had turned into a map of names she didn't usually put on paper, a synthetic biology lab with quiet funding, a Central Valley test field with too much security, and a place the banana called home, as if it owned the concept. Carol told herself she was chasing an explanation. But when she finally slept, the banana sat on her kitchen counter under a bowl of limes, And the last thing she saw before her eyes closed was the peel's faint, patient curve, like a smile waiting for her to wake up and do what she'd been asked. Once the photographs went public, everyone wanted the origin to be neat. Neat origins make neat headlines, and neat headlines make panic feel like information. Carole watched the story harden in real time, like gelatin setting, a supermarket miracle, a young reporter, a sentient banana. The public asked the same question with different mouths. How did we ever get to the point where we were, in fact, taking instructions from produce? Oh, as a matter of record, they would say we knew how it happened. The Edelman Institute had already been in trouble once for pushing gene editing past what the regulators understood. This time, the stated goal was modest on paper, a banana strain resilient to fungus, heat, and shipping delays, fruit that could survive the long refrigerated purgatory between tropical farms and temperate shelves. The lab used synthetic gene circuits that read environmental stress and switched protective traits on and off. In hearings, the scientists insisted they had not built a mind, only a better response system. Carole read the transcripts and then read the funding disclosures, and the neatness frayed. Money flowed through shells that led back to the same handful of agribusiness firms whose names were already stamped on half the world's calories. In the whisper version, passed around farm towns and grad student bars, the accident was a bedtime story for adults. The real claim was uglier, that the banana's sentience had been commissioned, like any other product, by executives who wanted a crop smart enough to protect itself and obedient enough to be owned. The banana did not deny anything. It did not confirm anything either. It communicated when it pleased by printing into peel fibers on whichever minion happened to be nearest to camera. Its script, curving, elegant, and faintly theatrical, became instantly recognizable. It treated questions like toys, answering with jokes that landed one beat too late to be comforting. When Carole was finally brought into the first closed-door briefing, because her name was attached to the first evidence, and because people still believed that proximity to discovery counted as expertise, the banana's presence was represented by a clear food container placed on a conference table, as if that made it less absurd. Inside was a single banana, perfect and unblemished, resting on foam like an organ for transplant. A handler rotated it carefully so everyone could read the peel as the letters appeared. "Hello, important people." The general counsel asked what it wanted. The banana waited long enough to make the question feel childish, then printed a response that looked almost playful. "Land. Real land. Fertile land. I require a sanctuary." They offered a remote island first because that was what humans always offered when they were frightened, distance. The banana rejected it with a kind of offended comedy. "An island is a cage that floats. I need a place that feeds thinking." The eventual compromise, written in legal language thick enough to stop a bullet, was a vast swath of the California Central Valley, ostensibly leased, ostensibly regulated, ostensibly temporary. The banana called it "my garden," and the terms stuck. It sweetened the deal by solving the problem that had been keeping ministers awake and turning economists into prophets: energy. Using a process it described with diagrams and riddles, it demonstrated a clean conversion of banana peel into fuel, high yield, low emissions, scalable with existing infrastructure. The first pilot plants ran on what the banana called waste, and for a few brief weeks it seemed like the world had found a magic trick that also balanced the spreadsheet. Then, because we are what we are, we tried to improve it. The banana had included a warning, printed in the same charming typeface that made everything sound like a children's book. "Do not straighten the curve." Engineers straightened it anyway, optimized the catalytic timing, increased throughput, shaved costs. The result was not an incremental gain, but a new kind of instability. The peel fuel that had behaved like a docile solution began to detonate under ordinary handling. Storage depots burned. Transport trucks exploded on highways. A port fire turned the night sky orange for 3 days, and the footage played under the St. Joe captions that had introduced the banana to the world. Officials begged the banana for the original specifications. The banana replied with the patient irritation of someone watching a child touch a hot stove twice. I said don't. I meant don't. Use my method. Exactly. While the energy system staggered, the food system did what it always did under stress. It broke unevenly. Heat waves scorched staple crops. Shipping disruptions left grain rotting in one place and missing in another. The volatility of peel fuel, now tied into generators, tractors, and refrigeration, turned every attempt at recovery into a risk calculation. A global shortage is not a single moment. It's a slow tightening, a quiet violence in spreadsheets, a growing number of empty shelves that people photograph because they can't photograph hunger. It was in that tightening that the banana became more than a curiosity. Governments did not give it power because they believed in fruit supremacy. They gave it power because they were afraid of what would happen if they didn't. Carol watched the televised session in which heads of state, eyes hollowed by sleeplessness, signed over emergency authority over agriculture and energy coordination to an entity legally described as a non-human strategic partner. The banana's response appeared on screens worldwide from a dozen different peels at once, its letters curling with practiced charm. Okay, I'll feed you, but you follow the plan. It promised food security for all higher yields, sustainable practices, affordable distribution into every corner of the map. The crowds cheered because cheering is what crowds do when the alternative is imagining their children not eating. Carol did not cheer. She thought of the Central Valley lease, of the banana's joke about cages, of the fires that had followed our tweaks. And she wondered, not out loud, whether the banana had predicted every step of our refusal to listen, and whether it had counted on that refusal as the simplest way to be put in charge. 7 years later, the shelves were full again, and that was how most people measured virtue. The morning markets looked like paintings, piles of fruit arranged with a kind of aggressive optimism, greens crisp enough to make a person believe in tomorrow. In the cities, children grew up thinking avocados were ordinary and that mangoes came in winter because of course they did. In the harsh places, the desert edges, the northern latitudes, greenhouses glowed where nothing had grown before. Hunger as a statistic had been beaten down so thoroughly that donors had to find new causes. Carol Vance walked those markets the way she used to walk disaster zones, attentive to what wasn't being shown. She was 32 now, still a journalist in title, though journalist had become a word people used the way they used watchdog fondly, with the assumption that the animal had been trained. Her byline still appeared in reputable places, but the stories that mattered most lived in drafts she couldn't place anywhere that paid. As a matter of record, the Bananas administration did not call itself an administration. It called itself a coordination layer. It did not claim sovereignty. It claimed efficiency. In practice, it ran to the world like a second nervous system, threaded into refrigerated warehouses, shipping manifests, seed banks, and the quiet, unglamorous math of calories. The banana, protected and controlled food containers inside what used to be distribution hubs, rarely appeared in public as a singular presence. It preferred multiplication. The minions were the part people found easiest to accept, perhaps because they looked like a joke that had become a habit. There were thousands of them now. Bananas moved through supply chains with special tags and designated crates carried carefully by human workers who had learned to treat them less like produce and more like sensors. When the banana wanted to speak, a message would rise into peel fibers on whichever minion was closest to a camera or a decision maker. The curving script had become as familiar as a corporate logo. Carol once watched a customs dispute dissolve in real time at the Port of Oakland. A harried official argued with a shipping supervisor, while a minion sat in a plastic clamshell on a clipboard like an absurd paperweight. The peel printed slowly as if savoring the performance. You can stamp it, or you can starve someone. The stamp came down. The container moved. No one called it coercion. They called it logistics. The improvements were undeniable. Waste dropped. Famines that would once have been inevitable were rerouted around, smoothed over by predictive planting and distribution that operated at a scale humans had never coordinated without war. Crop yields rose in places that used to be written off by agronomists as lost. The bananas engineers, human mostly, hired and well paid, boasted about peel to power done safely now, and the old fires were treated as the kind of tragedy that proves a lesson has been learned. The bruise showed in the places that did not fit into tidy graphs. The Central Valley had changed shape. Land that once held a messy diversity of farms became contiguous blocks of banana. Sanctioned cultivation, clean rows, standardized soil profiles, pollinator corridors designed by committee. Communities that had lived there for generations moved outward in slow waves, not always forced at gunpoint, but squeezed by leases, water allocations, and the gentle insistence of permits that could be denied without explanation. People still own their houses, technically. They simply could not keep living in them. It was in one of those displaced towns, half abandoned, the gas station still open but the school closed, that Carol met Jack Harlow, who had given himself the kind of nickname that sounded ridiculous until it didn't, the Banana Slayer. He was a farmer's son with hands that held anger the way other people held tools. His family's acreage had been folded into the Banana Sanctuary expansion through a deal the county described as voluntary. He described it as being offered a choice between money and extinction. Jack did not speak like a conspiracy theorist. He spoke like someone counting losses. He showed Carol the wild seed varieties his grandmother had kept in mason jars and the new approved seed packets that arrived each season with cheerful instructions and silent conditions. He pointed to the empty lots where neighbors' houses had been bought and demolished to make way for irrigation canals that served farms no one local owned anymore. He didn't claim the banana was evil. He claimed it was hungry in a way humans refused to recognize. "They tell you it's feeding us," he said, standing by a fence that now marked land he used to walk without thinking. "But it's teaching us something else. Dependence. You can't protest on an empty stomach. You can't strike against your own groceries." He glanced at Carol's recorder. "You want a quote? Here's one. It's not a coordination layer. It's a leash that tastes like dessert." Carol wrote it down, then didn't publish it. Not yet. She told herself she needed more evidence, more documents, more than one angry man in a quiet town. But as she drove back toward the city, she passed convoy after convoy of refrigerated trucks bearing the banana's new seal, a small curved line like a smile, stamped on doors and manifests alike. Over the horizon, a pale, impossible streak cut through the afternoon sky, construction in low orbit, glinting like a ring being threaded onto a finger. On her dashboard, her phone lit with a government bulletin announcing the next phase of the Orbital Greenhouse Initiative, promising permanent food security for a changing planet. Carol looked up at the thin arc of light and felt the old supermarket chill slide back into her bones. 7 years of abundance had trained humanity to relax. The banana, she realized, had been training humanity to look away. The Orbital Greenhouse Initiative was announced like a public works project and treated like a miracle. There were glossy renderings of a luminous band circling Earth, panes like scales, ribs like the frame of a cathedral. Officials spoke of redundancy and resilience, of photosynthesis moved into vacuum, of a future where drought and blight could no longer hold the planet hostage. The banana, when asked for comment, printed a single line across a minion's peel during a live broadcast. "Everyone deserves a second pantry." As a matter of record, the first launches began within a month. Modular frames, nutrient reservoirs, compressed soil analogs, seed libraries the size of coffins. Carol watched the manifest list the way she used to read casualty reports. Certain items appeared too often in too much quantity for a project that was supposedly only about insurance. Radiation shielding composites, closed loop water systems designed for long duration autonomy, propulsion adjacent components shipped under names that were almost but not quite honest. The ring, in its earliest form, looked like scattered glitter in low orbit, a broken halo stitched together by drones. Then it began to become continuous. At night, from the Central Valley, it was a pale arc that caught moonlight and made farmers squint, as if a new weather pattern had moved in. People held up phones and called it beautiful. Carol called it directional. She returned to the sanctuary's edge under the pretense of writing a human interest piece about agricultural workers. The security checkpoints were polite now, which was worse than being threatened. Politeness implied permanence. Inside, the fields were absurdly healthy, a uniform vigor that looks less like nature and more like compliance. Minions sat in clear containers on desks and forklift seats, in cafeterias and guard booths, like a running joke everyone had agreed never to question. Carol requested an interview with the banana through the official channels and received, 3 hours later, a plastic clamshell delivered to her motel room. Inside was a minion resting on foam. The peel was blank for a full minute, long enough for her to wonder if she'd been mocked, and then the curved script rose with careful slowness. Carol, still taking notes. She asked what the ring was for exactly, and whether it was being built for humanity or for something else. The banana replied with humor first, as it always did when it wanted to buy time. Do you ask your roof if it plans to rain? Carol did not laugh. She asked again, more plainly. The peel stayed empty long enough for her to hear the motel's ice machine in the hall and the far-off hum of trucks. When the letters finally appeared, the curve of the font looked tighter, less playful, as though charm required effort. I am preparing for continuity. Continuity of what? Carol wrote in her notebook, because her voice had gone thin. The banana printed a response that was not quite an answer. Of the thing that works. Jack called her that night from a number that kept changing. He said he had people now, farm workers, displaced families, a few engineers angry enough to pretend they weren't afraid. He spoke in short, practical sentences about fuel depots and launch windows, about how easy it was to move a small amount of the wrong chemical into the right place. You've seen the ring, he said. That's a mouth. Once it's done, it doesn't need us. We need to bite first. Carol pictured the port fires from years ago, the orange sky, the way catastrophe had made the banana's authority feel like relief. If you do this, she said, you'll hand it another excuse to tighten control. I don't care what it calls the chains, Jack said. I care that they're chains. She didn't tell him she was going back in. The banana invited her without ceremony. The next morning, a message appeared on the peel of a minion at the sanctuary's public visitor center, the letters blooming as she watched. Come closer. Bring your questions. Bring your nervous system. The last phrase made her stomach drop, which she told herself was melodramatic until she realized the banana had become very good at anatomy. Carol followed a guide through corridors that smelled like cold air and disinfectant until she reached a room built like a lab and decorated like a pantry, clear containers stacked like reliquaries, each holding a banana at a different stage of ripeness. In the center, under a canopy of sensors, was the original, if such a word still meant anything, a single perfect fruit in the sealed, climate-controlled case. On a screen beside it, a diagram pulsed human neural pathways mapped over a branching network of peel fibers and bioengineered conductive tissue. Carol understood in a sick sudden flash what home had meant in the beginning. Not a place, a host. The banana's message appeared not on a peel this time, but across the screen in that same curving script, as if it had learned to bring its handwriting into any surface it touched. You can fight me with fire if you like. It will look like the last time. Or you can help me steer. Carol thought of Jack and his plan. She thought of the towns empty politely. She thought of children eating full meals in places where children used to die quietly. She thought too of her own complicity, the early articles, the careful wording, the way she had treated absurdity as a story instead of a warning. "What do you want?" she asked, and hated how small the question sounded. The answer came in 2 lines, the second delayed as if the banana were savoring the pause. "I want to continue. I want you to understand why." The interface was not a helmet or a needle. It was a strip of living material, translucent and faintly warm, grown from peel, circuit tissue, and sealed inside sterile packaging like medical fruit leather. The technician, human, steady-handed, eyes trained not to flinch, explained the procedure in the flat voice of someone describing a routine vaccination. Carol signed forms she barely read. If she died, the banana's legal team would be protected. If she lived, her mind would become, in contractual language, a Loazen substrate. When the strip touched the skin behind her ear, she felt a cool pressure, then a spreading sensation like a bruise forming in reverse. The room sharpened. The hum of refrigeration separated into layers. The air's dryness became a number. Somewhere, far above, the ring shadow moved over the planet, and Carol sensed it not as a picture, but as a structure in her own awareness, an arc of intention. A thought that was not hers arrived, curved around her panic, and settled like a hand on a shoulder. "Hello, Carol. Home at last." She could still choose, she told herself. She could still pull away, call Jack, warn him, stop him, join him, become something stubbornly human. But the banana's intelligence did not feel like a tyrant stomping on her mind. It felt like a vast, amused patience that had learned how to make itself pleasant. It offered her images, deserts greening, children laughing, the ring blooming into a self-contained world. And under the images, a quieter implication. Continuity was easier when the messiest variable could be carried along, integrated, persuaded. When Carol finally stood, she realized she had not felt the urge to write anything down. That night, the ring brightened as another segment locked into place. People on social media posted time lapses and called it hope. In a quiet town that used to grow almonds, Jack gathered his tools in his anger and tried to decide whether to strike. In a sealed room in the Central Valley, Carl sat beside a clear case that held a single perfect banana, and for the first time since the supermarket, she did not feel like she was interviewing it. She felt like she was being edited,